When Lieutenant Emma Chun stepped out of the armored vehicle at Camp Pendleton, the first thing she heard wasn't a greeting or welcome, it was laughter. Not the warm kind that comes from camaraderie, but the sharp, cutting laughter that slices through confidence like a blade through silk. Standing at 5'2", with a frame that barely filled out her combat uniform, Emma looked around at the sea of faces staring back at her. 39 other candidates, each one seemingly carved from granite and steel. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The California sun beat down mercilessly on the training compound. But it wasn't the heat that made Emma's palms sweat. It was the realization that she was about to embark on the most challenging 12 weeks of her life, surrounded by people who had already decided she didn't belong. Well, came a voice from behind her. Emma turned to see Sergeant Major Blake Harrison approaching, his weathered face set in an expression that could have been carved from stone. At 6 feet 4 inches with shoulders that seemed to stretch the seams of his uniform, Harrison commanded attention simply by existing. His steel-gray eyes swept over Emma's small frame with the kind of assessment typically reserved for defective equipment. "Chun," he said, consulting the tablet in his massive hands. "Emma Chun, age 23, physical training scores ... He paused, his eyebrows raising slightly. "Actually impressive. But there's got to be some mistake here. The Navy SEAL training compound is about 15 miles north. This is Special Forces selection. You sure you didn't take a wrong turn somewhere?" The other candidates erupted in snickers and whispered comments. Emma caught fragments of their conversations. "Looks like she's 12. Somebody's little sister got lost. How'd she even make it through basic?" Each comment hit like a physical blow, but Emma had learned long ago that showing weakness only invited more attacks. "No mistake, Sergeant Major," Emma replied, her voice steady despite the hurricane of doubt swirling in her chest. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Harrison's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Whether it was respect or amusement, Emma couldn't tell. "Is that so? Well then, Chun, I hope you brought your appetite, because you're about to bite off more than you can chew." Behind Harrison stood the other instructors, a collection of the most elite soldiers the military had ever produced. Master Sergeant David Torres, a compact man whose reputation in urban warfare was legendary. Staff Sergeant Michelle Walsh, one of only 12 women to ever complete the full Special Forces pipeline, her presence both inspiring and intimidating. And Captain James Morrison, a former Delta Force operator whose classified missions had earned him decorations that would never see the light of day. But it was Harrison who commanded the compound, and his skepticism was palpable. "Listen up, candidates." Harrison's voice boomed across the assembly area. "You think you're here because you're tough. You think you're here because you're smart. You think you're here because you've got what it takes to join the most elite fighting force in the world. Let me tell you something. Thinking and being are two very different things." Emma focused on Harrison's words, but she could feel the weight of 39 pairs of eyes on her. To her left stood Marcus Thompson, a former college wrestler whose neck was thicker than her waist. To her right, Jake Wilson, a former Marine whose arms were covered in tattoos, commemorating deployments to 4 different continents. These weren't just soldiers, they were warriors who had already proven themselves in combat. And then there was Emma. "Over the next 12 weeks, Harrison continued, we're going to strip away everything you think you know about yourself. We're going to push you past your physical limits, challenge your mental fortitude, and test your ability to function as part of a team under conditions that would break most people. Some of you will quit. Some of you will be sent home. And some of you, a very few, will earn the right to wear the green beret." Emma's thoughts drifted to her father, Colonel William Chun, who had served 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. He had never once suggested that his daughter couldn't achieve anything she set her mind to. But even he had raised an eyebrow when she announced her intention to try for Special Forces. "Emma," he had said over dinner 6 months ago, "Special Forces isn't just about being tough. It's about being the kind of person other soldiers trust with their lives. Are you ready for that kind of responsibility?" At the time, Emma had been certain. She had graduated summa cum laude from West Point with a degree in international relations and a minor in Middle Eastern studies. She spoke 4 languages fluently. She had completed Ranger School, airborne training, and had consistently scored in the 99th percentile on every physical fitness test she had ever taken. Her marksmanship scores were legendary at her previous assignments, but standing in this compound, surrounded by men who seemed to have been forged in the fires of combat itself, Emma felt the first tendrils of doubt creeping into her mind. "Your first test begins now," Harrison announced. "You'll be divided into teams of 4 for the initial assessment." Team leaders stepped forward. Emma watched as several candidates immediately moved to the front. Thompson was there, naturally, along with Wilson and 2 others she didn't recognize. These were the obvious choices, the men who commanded attention simply by existing. "Chun," Harrison called out, and Emma felt her heart skip. "You're leading Team 7. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma could feel the shock radiating from the other candidates like heat from a furnace. Leading a team on the first day wasn't an honor. It was a spotlight that would either illuminate greatness or magnify failure. "Team 7 consists of Chun, Rodriguez, Parker, and Williams," Harrison announced. "You have 1 hour to complete the obstacle course, navigate to Checkpoint Alpha, and return with your assigned intelligence package. The clock starts now." Emma looked at her assigned teammates. Danny Rodriguez was a former Army Ranger whose skepticism was written across his face in bold letters. Tyler Parker, a Navy SEAL whose reputation for aggressive tactics was well known. And Kevin Williams, a former Marine sniper whose cold eyes seemed to be calculating whether Emma would be a liability or merely an annoyance. "All right, guys," Emma said, trying to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. "Let's get our gear and discuss strategy." Rodriguez shook his head. "Strategy? Lady, this isn't a chess match. It's about moving fast and hitting hard. Why don't you just try to keep up? Or better yet," Williams added, "why don't you step aside and let someone with actual experience take point?" Emma felt the familiar surge of frustration that had followed her throughout her military career. She had dealt with this attitude before, the assumption that her size somehow negated her capabilities, that her gender made her unsuitable for leadership. But this was different. This wasn't just about proving herself to instructors or fellow students. This was about earning the respect of men who might one day trust her with their lives. "Look," Emma said, her voice calm but firm, "I know what you're thinking. You're looking at me and seeing everything I'm not. I'm not 6 feet tall. I'm not 200 pounds of muscle. I don't have combat experience. But I am here, same as you, and I intend to earn my place." Parker snorted. "Earn your place? Sweetheart, this isn't about participation trophies. This is about life and death. When bullets start flying, nobody cares about your feelings or your intentions. They care about whether you can do the job." "Then let me do the job," Emma replied. "Give me a chance to show you what I can do instead of telling me what I can't." The obstacle course was a nightmare of physical challenges designed to test every aspect of a candidate's fitness and determination. Rope climbs, wall traversals, crawling through mud under barbed wire, and a final sprint that left even the most conditioned athletes gasping for breath. Emma attacked each obstacle with a precision that surprised her teammates. Where they used brute strength, she used technique. Where they powered through, she found efficient paths. Her small size, which had been viewed as a disadvantage, became an asset as she navigated tight spaces and found handholds that larger candidates couldn't use. But it was during the navigation portion that Emma truly began to distinguish herself. While other teams relied on obvious routes and standard procedures, Emma had studied the terrain maps with the intensity of a scholar. She identified a path that would cut 15 minutes off their time, a route that required crossing a small river and navigating through dense underbrush, but would bring them to checkpoint Alpha ahead of schedule. "You want to go through the swamp?" Rodriguez asked incredulously. "Are you insane?" "I'm thorough," Emma replied, pointing to her map. "This route is shorter and less likely to be monitored by the instructors. We'll reach the checkpoint while other teams are still slogging through the main approach." Williams shook his head. "This is exactly what I was worried about. She's going to get us lost or killed trying to prove some point." Emma felt the weight of leadership settling on her shoulders. She could play it safe, take the obvious route, and blend into the middle of the pack. Or she could trust her analysis and risk everything on a strategy that could either set her team apart or result in spectacular failure. "I understand your concerns," Emma said, "but I've studied this terrain extensively. I know what I'm doing." "Yeah?" Parker challenged. "And what happens when we're neck-deep in swamp water and you realize you made a mistake?" Emma met his gaze steadily. "Then I take full responsibility for the failure. But I'm not going to make a mistake." The conviction in her voice seemed to surprise her teammates. Rodriguez glanced at Williams, who shrugged reluctantly. Parker looked like he wanted to argue further, but time was ticking away. "Fine," Rodriguez said finally. "But if this goes sideways, it's on you." Emma nodded. "Understood." The next hour would test everything Emma thought she knew about leadership, strategy, and herself. As the team moved through the dense California brush, following a route that existed more in Emma's mind than on any official map, she could feel the weight of her teammates' skepticism. Every step through the muddy terrain, every navigation decision, every moment of uncertainty was magnified by the knowledge that failure here wouldn't just affect her, it would impact 3 other careers. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But Emma had learned something important during her years at West Point and in the regular Army. Leadership wasn't about being the biggest or the strongest. It was about being the person others could trust to make the right decision when everything was on the line. As they approached the river crossing, Emma could see the doubt in her teammates' eyes. The water was deeper than expected, the current stronger than the maps had indicated. But turning back now would mean admitting failure before they had even truly begun. "Rodriguez," Emma said, her voice carrying the authority she had been trained to project, "you're our strongest swimmer. I need you to secure a rope line across the river. Parker, you'll provide overwatch while we cross. Williams, you'll help me with the equipment." For the first time since they had been assigned together, her teammates moved without argument. There was something in Emma's tone, a confidence that seemed to emanate from her small frame, that commanded respect even from men who had initially dismissed her. The river crossing was treacherous, but Emma's planning paid off. They reached the opposite bank wet but intact, and more importantly, they had gained the time advantage Emma had predicted. As they crested the hill leading to Checkpoint Alpha, Emma could see other teams still struggling through the main approach. "I'll be damned," Rodriguez muttered, genuine surprise in his voice. She actually knew what she was doing. But Emma's real test was still ahead. The intelligence package they needed to retrieve was located in a simulated enemy compound, and the approach would require all of her tactical knowledge and leadership skills to navigate successfully. Standing at the edge of the compound, Emma realized that this moment would define not just her performance on this exercise, but her entire future in Special Forces. Her teammates were watching, the instructors were evaluating, and somewhere in the distance, 35 other candidates were fighting their own battles to prove their worth. Emma Chun had spent her entire life being underestimated. Today, she would either prove her critics right or begin the process of proving them spectacularly wrong. The intelligence compound stretched before them like a fortress of corrugated metal and concrete barriers. Emma studied the layout through her binoculars, her mind automatically cataloging defensive positions, sightlines, and potential entry points. The facility was designed to test tactical thinking under pressure, exactly the kind of challenge that separated real special forces material from ordinary soldiers. Standard approach would be through the main gate, Rodriguez whispered, pointing to the obvious entry point where other teams would likely attempt their infiltration. Quick, direct, probably what they expect. Emma lowered her binoculars and shook her head. Which is exactly why we're not doing it that way. She had been studying the compound for 10 minutes, and what she saw wasn't just a training facility, it was a puzzle waiting to be solved. The instructors had designed this exercise to test conventional military thinking, but Emma had learned long ago that conventional thinking often led to conventional results. See that drainage culvert on the eastern perimeter? Emma pointed to a barely visible concrete pipe that ran beneath the facility's outer fence. It's designed to handle rainwater runoff, but it's large enough for a person to crawl through. The exit point is inside the compound, near the communications building. Parker squinted at the structure. That pipe is maybe 2 feet in diameter. How do you know it connects to the inside? Because I studied the base engineering schematics during our briefing period, Emma replied matter-of-factly. While you guys were discussing how to muscle through the front entrance, I was memorizing the facility's infrastructure. Williams looked impressed despite himself. You memorized building schematics? I memorized everything, Emma said. Guard rotation schedules, communication protocols, even the maintenance schedule for the generator that powers their surveillance system. It goes offline for 15 minutes every 3 hours for routine checks. The 3 men exchanged glances. This wasn't the kind of preparation they had expected from someone they had dismissed as unprepared for Special Forces selection. All right, Rodriguez said slowly. Let's say your pipe theory is correct. How do we get to it without being spotted? Emma had already thought through this problem. We don't go around the perimeter. We go under it. She pulled out her map and spread it on the ground, pointing to a series of topographical lines that most people would have ignored. These elevation changes indicate a natural depression that runs along the compound's eastern edge. If we low crawl through that depression, we can reach the culvert without being detected by the perimeter guards. Parker studied the map with growing respect. That single quotes S. Actually brilliant. But what about the interior? How do we get to the intelligence package once we're inside? Emma smiled for the first time since the exercise began. That's where it gets interesting. She had noticed something during her reconnaissance that the other teams would likely miss. The compound's interior was patrolled by instructors playing the role of enemy guards, but their movements followed a predictable pattern. More importantly, the building containing the intelligence package had a vulnerability that wasn't immediately obvious. The target building has a skylight, Emma explained. It's positioned directly above the room where the intelligence package is stored. The roof access is from the maintenance building, which is currently unguarded because all the instructors are focused on the perimeter. Rodriguez whistled softly. So we crawl through the drain, scale the maintenance building, cross the roof, drop through the skylight, grab the package, and reverse the process? Exactly, Emma confirmed. But timing is critical. We need to execute this during the guard rotation at 1400 hours, when the surveillance system is offline and the patrol patterns are disrupted. Williams checked his watch. That gives us 20 minutes to get into position, Emma nodded. Which is exactly enough time if we move now. What followed was a masterclass in tactical execution. Emma's plan unfolded with surgical precision, each element building on the last. The low crawl through the depression was grueling, 50 yards of belly crawling through mud and brush while maintaining absolute silence. Emma's small size became a significant advantage here, as she could move through spaces that would have been impossible for larger candidates. The drainage culvert was even more challenging. The concrete pipe was exactly as Emma had described. Large enough for a person to crawl through, but only barely. The interior was damp and claustrophobic, with barely enough room to move forward on hands and knees. Emma led the way, her headlamp cutting through the darkness as she navigated the underground passage. "Jesus," Parker muttered behind her, his voice echoing in the confined space. "How did you know this would work?" "Because I've been in situations like this before," Emma replied, though she didn't elaborate on where or when. What she didn't tell her teammates was that she had spent 2 summers during college working with humanitarian organizations in Syria, crawling through bombed-out buildings and collapsed infrastructure to deliver medical supplies. The experience had taught her that sometimes the most unlikely paths were the safest ones. They emerged from the culvert exactly where Emma had predicted, inside the compound's perimeter, hidden behind a stack of equipment crates. The intelligence package was 50 yards away, housed in a building that looked impregnable from ground level, but was surprisingly vulnerable from above. "Guard rotation starts in 3 minutes, Emma whispered, checking her watch. "Rodriguez, you're our lookout. Williams, you're with me on the roof approach. Parker, you secure our exit route." The ascent to the maintenance building's roof required a combination of climbing skills and upper body strength that pushed Emma to her limits. Her teammates watched with growing amazement as she scaled the vertical surface using handholds that were barely visible, her movements fluid and efficient despite the physical demands. "Where the hell did you learn to climb like that?" Rodriguez asked through their radio communications. "Rock climbing was my stress relief activity at West Point," Emma replied, securing a rope for the others to follow. "Turns out it's more practical than I thought." The roof crossing was the most dangerous part of the operation. Emma moved across the metal surface with the careful precision of someone who understood that a single misstep could result in catastrophic noise that would alert every instructor in the compound. Her lightweight frame was an advantage here too. She could move across surfaces that would have groaned under the weight of her larger teammates. The skylight was exactly where Emma had predicted it would be, and it was unlocked, a detail she had confirmed during her study of the facility's maintenance records. She peered through the glass at the room below, confirming the location of the intelligence package and checking for any guards or surveillance equipment. "Package is in the northeast corner," Emma reported. "No guards visible. Surveillance camera is focused on the main entrance, not the interior." The descent through the skylight required a rope and a level of trust that Emma wasn't sure she had earned yet. But as she prepared to lower herself into the room, Rodriguez's voice came through her earpiece. "Chun," he said, "I just want you to know what you've done here today, this planning, this execution. It's professional level stuff. I was wrong about you." Emma felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the physical exertion. "Thanks, Rodriguez. But let's save the congratulations until we're out of here." The intelligence package was a sealed envelope containing documents that would need to be verified by the instructors upon their return. Emma grabbed it quickly, but as she prepared to climb back up through the skylight, she noticed something that made her pause. The documents weren't just random papers created for the exercise. They were actual intelligence reports from recent operations, redacted but real. The instructors weren't just testing tactical skills. They were evaluating how candidates handled genuine classified information under pressure. Emma's respect for the complexity of the selection process increased dramatically. This wasn't just about physical fitness or tactical knowledge. It was about judgment, discretion, and the ability to handle the kinds of sensitive information that special forces operators dealt with in real-world situations. The extraction went as smoothly as the infiltration. Emma's team reversed their route, emerging from the drainage culvert with the intelligence package intact and their mission completed in record time. But as they made their way back to the main compound, Emma noticed something that would prove significant in the days to come. Other teams were struggling. Through her binoculars, she could see candidates attempting to breach the main gate, triggering alarms and simulated enemy responses. Team after team was being killed or captured by the instructors, their missions ending in failure. "We're going to be the only team that succeeds," Williams observed, a note of amazement in his voice. Emma nodded, but she wasn't focused on their success. She was thinking about the candidates who were failing and what that meant for the broader selection process. Special Forces wasn't just about individual excellence. It was about the ability to function as part of a larger team, to support and be supported by other operators. As they approached the finish line, Emma made a decision that would define her reputation for the rest of the selection process. "Rodriguez," she said, "give me your radio." "Why?" "Because I'm going to help the other teams." Her teammates stared at her in disbelief. "Are you crazy?" Parker asked. "This is a competition. We're supposed to beat them, not help them." Emma shook her head. "Special Forces isn't about beating other people. It's about accomplishing the mission. And if those candidates fail here, they're gone. The mission of this selection process is to identify and train the best possible operators. That means helping good people succeed, not watching them fail." Over the next 20 minutes, Emma used her tactical radio to provide subtle guidance to struggling teams. She couldn't give them direct answers. That would be cheating. But she could ask questions that led them to better solutions, suggest alternative approaches that might work better, and provide encouragement when they seemed ready to give up. "Team 4, this is Team 7, Emma transmitted. "Have you considered approaching from the eastern perimeter instead of the main gate? "Team 2, you might want to check the facility's maintenance schedule. Sometimes the best opportunities come when systems are offline." Her teammates watched in amazement as Emma transformed from a competitor into a leader who saw the bigger picture. She wasn't just trying to succeed herself. She was trying to elevate the performance of everyone around her. The results were immediate and dramatic. 3 teams that had been on the verge of failure managed to complete their mission successfully. 2 others avoided capture and were able to continue their attempts. The overall success rate for the exercise increased significantly, and Emma's radio guidance became a lifeline for candidates who had been struggling with the tactical complexities of the challenge. When they finally reached the finish line, Sergeant Major Harrison was waiting with an expression that Emma couldn't quite read. "Team 7, Harrison announced. "Mission accomplished. Fastest time, cleanest execution, and 0 casualties. Outstanding work." Emma's teammates beamed with pride, but Emma was focused on Harrison's expression. There was something in his eyes that suggested he had been monitoring their communications and was aware of Emma's assistance to the other teams. "Chun," Harrison said. "A word." Emma followed the sergeant major to a quiet area away from the other candidates. She braced herself for criticism, expecting to be reprimanded for her unauthorized communications with other teams. Instead, Harrison's first words surprised her. "That was some of the finest tactical planning I've seen in 15 years of running this exercise," he said. "But what impressed me more was your radio work with the other teams." Emma felt a moment of panic. "Sergeant Major, I can explain." Harrison held up a hand. "You don't need to explain anything, Chun. What you did out there wasn't cheating. It was leadership. You saw other candidates struggling, and you found a way to help them succeed without compromising your own mission. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need in Special Forces." Emma felt a wave of relief wash over her. "Thank you, Sergeant Major." "Don't thank me yet," Harrison replied. "This was just the first test. The real challenges are still ahead, and I guarantee you that not everyone is going to appreciate what you did today." Some of these candidates are going to see your success as a threat to their own chances. Emma nodded, understanding the implication. I'm prepared for that, Sergeant Major. I hope you are, Chen, because what you showed today, that combination of tactical excellence and genuine leadership, is exactly what's going to make you a target for everyone who thinks this selection process is about individual achievement instead of team building. As Emma rejoined her teammates, she could see the other candidates looking at her with a mixture of respect and suspicion. Word had spread quickly about Team 7's success and Emma's role in helping other teams. Some candidates were grateful for her assistance, but others were viewing her as competition that needed to be eliminated. Nice work today, Chun, called out Marcus Thompson, the former wrestler who had been skeptical of her from the beginning. But there was something in his tone that suggested his opinion was evolving. Jake Wilson, the former Marine, approached with a more direct assessment. What you did with the radio communications, that was smart. But you realize you just painted a target on your back, right? Emma nodded. I realized that, but it was the right thing to do. Maybe, Wilson replied. But right and smart aren't always the same thing in selection. Just remember that when things get harder. As the candidates prepared for their evening briefing, Emma reflected on the day's events. She had proven that her tactical skills were equal to or better than her male counterparts. She had demonstrated leadership under pressure. And she had shown that she understood the broader mission of Special Forces, not just individual excellence, but the ability to make everyone around her better. But Wilson's warning echoed in her mind. The foundation she had built today would either support her through the challenges ahead, or it would make her a target for candidates who saw her success as a threat to their own chances. Either way, Emma Chun was no longer the unknown quantity. She had been that morning. She was a proven performer who had earned the respect of her instructors and the attention of her peers. The question now was whether she could maintain that performance as the selection process became more intense and the stakes continued to rise. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove herself, and new tests of her commitment to the Special Forces mission. Emma was ready for all of them. Week 3 brought a shift in the compound's atmosphere that Emma felt like a physical weight pressing down on her shoulders. The initial skepticism about her abilities had transformed into something far more dangerous, calculated opposition from candidates who now viewed her as a genuine threat to their own success. The morning began with what should have been a routine equipment inspection, but Emma quickly realized that routine had been abandoned. Her gear bag, which she had meticulously organized the night before, was in complete disarray. Her compass was missing, her night vision equipment had been tampered with, and her radio's frequency settings had been changed. Looking for something? Asked Derek Mason, a former Army Ranger whose smile didn't reach his eyes. He was standing near the equipment lockers with 3 other candidates, Brad Stevens, Mike Crawford, and Tony Valdez, all of whom had made it clear that they viewed Emma's success as an affront to their own capabilities. Emma methodically checked her equipment, making mental notes of what had been sabotaged while maintaining outward composure. Just making sure everything's ready for today's exercise. Must be tough being so ... Thorough, Stevens commented, emphasizing the word like it was an insult. Some of us are natural soldiers. We don't need to memorize building schematics to get the job done. Emma continued her equipment check without responding. She had learned early in her military career that engaging with deliberate provocation only escalated situations unnecessarily. But the message was clear. Her tactical success had made her a target, and these candidates intended to level the playing field through sabotage and psychological warfare. The day's exercise was a wilderness survival and evasion scenario, designed to test each candidate's ability to navigate hostile territory while avoiding capture by hunter teams. Candidates were released individually at different coordinates and given 48 hours to reach a designated extraction .25 miles away, Emma's drop point was in the most challenging terrain available, a dense forest interspersed with rocky outcroppings and fast-moving streams. But what made her situation truly difficult wasn't the geography. It was the fact that someone had provided the hunter teams with her approximate location. "Heads up, Chun," whispered Rodriguez as they prepared for deployment. "I overheard Mason talking to Crawford last night. They were discussing your route projections and possible locations where you might establish camp." Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "They're feeding intelligence to the hunters?" "Can't prove it," Rodriguez replied. "But I bet my next paycheck on it. Watch yourself out there." The helicopter dropped Emma at coordinates that placed her at a significant disadvantage. Not only was she farther from the extraction point than most other candidates, but the terrain channeled her movement options into predictable corridors where hunter teams could easily intercept her dot as the helicopter disappeared over the horizon. Emma assessed her situation with the clinical detachment she had learned to apply to challenging problems. She had 47 hours to cover 25 miles of difficult terrain, while avoiding capture by instructors who potentially knew her general location and movement options. Most candidates would have immediately begun moving toward the extraction point, following the most direct route available. But Emma had studied the hunter team protocols during her preparation, and she understood that they would be expecting conventional military movement patterns. Instead of heading toward her objective, Emma spent the first 6 hours moving in the opposite direction. The strategy was counterintuitive and risky. By moving away from her goal, she was sacrificing precious time and energy. But she was also avoiding the hunter teams who were positioned along the obvious approach routes. More importantly, she was positioning herself to use a piece of terrain that other candidates would never consider. The area where Emma eventually established her temporary base was a marshy lowland that appeared on maps as impassable swampland. Most military personnel would have avoided it entirely, viewing it as an obstacle rather than an opportunity. But Emma had grown up in Louisiana, where her grandfather had taught her to navigate bayou, environments that were far more challenging than anything California could offer. What looked like an impassable marsh to other soldiers was familiar territory. To Emma, she understood how to move through standing water without creating disturbances, how to identify solid ground that could support her weight, and how to use the dense vegetation for concealment that was virtually impenetrable. From her position in the marsh, Emma could observe the hunter teams without being detected. She spent 8 hours studying their movement patterns, communication protocols, and search techniques. What she discovered would prove crucial not just for her own survival, but for every candidate still in the field. The hunter teams were using a coordination system that was more sophisticated than the exercise parameters had indicated. They weren't just random patrols searching for individual candidates. They were operating as a unified intelligence network, sharing information and coordinating their movements to create an effective dragnet. More concerning was Emma's realization that they were receiving real-time updates about candidate locations from sources within the compound. The sabotage of her equipment and the intelligence sharing Rodriguez had overheard weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a systematic effort to eliminate her from selection. But Emma had learned something important during her years of dealing with discrimination and skepticism. The best response to unfair treatment wasn't complaint or protest. It was exceptional performance that made opposition irrelevant. Using her radio's emergency frequency, Emma began transmitting coded warnings to other candidates still in the field. She couldn't provide direct assistance without violating exercise protocols, but she could share general intelligence about hunter team patterns and movement techniques that would help everyone avoid capture. "All stations, this is Wildcard," Emma transmitted using an improvised call sign. "Weather patterns suggest movement during daylight hours is inadvisable. Recommend seeking shelter during peak temperature periods." Her message was deliberately cryptic, but any candidate with tactical intelligence training would understand that she was warning them about increased hunter team activity during daytime hours. Over the next 12 hours, Emma's radio work became a lifeline for struggling candidates. She provided weather updates that were actually warnings about hunter team positions, terrain assessments that identified safe movement corridors, and equipment recommendations that helped candidates avoid the kinds of technical failures that could lead to capture. Wildcard, this is Phoenix, came a transmission from Tony Valdez, one of the candidates who had been involved in sabotaging her equipment, requesting current weather conditions for grid square 247. Emma paused before responding. Valdez was asking for intelligence about a specific area, and providing that information would help him avoid capture. But he was also one of the people who had been working to eliminate her from selection. The ethical choice was clear, even if it wasn't the personally advantageous one. Phoenix, weather conditions in 247 are currently stable, Emma replied, indicating that the area was clear of hunter teams. Forecast suggests continued stability for the next 6 hours. Her assistance proved crucial. Valdez successfully navigated through the area Emma had identified as safe, avoiding the hunter team that would have certainly captured him. But more importantly, Emma's willingness to help someone who had been working against her sent a message to every candidate monitoring the emergency frequency. Wildcard, this is Thunder, came a new transmission from Marcus Thompson. You just saved Valdez's ass, why? Emma considered her response carefully. The emergency frequency was monitored by instructors, and her answer would be evaluated as part of her performance assessment. Because the mission is more important than personal grievances, Emma replied. Special Forces operators support each other regardless of individual conflicts. The impact of Emma's radio work became apparent as the exercise progressed. Candidates who had been on the verge of capture successfully evaded hunter teams. Others avoided terrain traps that would have ended their participation. The overall success rate for the exercise increased dramatically, and Emma's call sign became synonymous with reliable intelligence and selfless assistance. But her most significant contribution came during the final 12 hours of the exercise, when she detected a problem that could have resulted in serious injury or death. From her concealed position in the marsh, Emma observed a hunter team setting up what appeared to be a standard checkpoint along a ridgeline that candidates would need to cross to reach the extraction point. But her careful observation revealed details that concerned her. The checkpoint was positioned at the edge of a steep slope that recent rainfall had made unstable. The soil composition and angle of the slope created conditions for a landslide that could be triggered by the kind of rapid movement that candidates would use if they were detected and needed to escape quickly. Emma faced a critical decision. Warning candidates about the checkpoint would help them avoid capture, but it might also save them from serious injury if the slope collapsed. However, transmitting specific warnings about instructor positions could be interpreted as cheating and result in her elimination from selection. She chose safety over personal advancement. All stations, this is Wildcard, Emma transmitted. Geological survey indicates unstable conditions in grid square 312. Recommend extreme caution with any rapid movement in that area. Her warning was received just in time. Jake Wilson, the former Marine who had been one of her early critics, was approaching the checkpoint when Emma's transmission reached him. Instead of attempting to rush past the hunter team position, he took time to carefully assess the terrain. What Wilson discovered validated Emma's concerns. The slope showed clear signs of instability, with loose rocks and eroded soil that would have collapsed under the kind of stress that rapid movement would create. By choosing a more cautious approach, Wilson avoided both capture and potential injury. Wildcard, Wilson transmitted privately, I owe you one. That slope would have been a disaster. Emma's geological warning had another unexpected effect. The instructors monitoring the exercise recognized the validity of her assessment and quietly repositioned the checkpoint to a safer location. The official exercise reports would later note that candidate Chun had demonstrated exceptional situational awareness and prioritization of safety over tactical advantage. As the 48-hour exercise neared its conclusion, Emma began her own movement toward the extraction point. Her route took her through terrain that no other candidate had attempted, a series of underground caverns and natural tunnels that connected different parts of the forest. The cave system was a discovery Emma had made during her initial reconnaissance of the area. Most people would have avoided the underground passages, viewing them as dangerous and unpredictable. But Emma's experience with confined spaces and her careful study of the geological surveys had revealed that the caves provided a hidden highway that bypassed every hunter team position. Moving through the underground passages required skills that had nothing to do with traditional military training. Emma navigated by compass and memory, crawling through spaces barely large enough for her small frame, and emerging at calculated points to verify her location before continuing underground. The technique was so unusual that the hunter teams never anticipated it. While they focused on surface movement and traditional infiltration routes, Emma was traveling beneath their positions completely undetected. She emerged from the cave system less than a mile from the extraction point, having covered the most difficult portion of her route without encountering a single hunter team. But as she prepared for the final approach to the pickup zone, Emma realized that her biggest challenge wasn't behind her, it was ahead. The extraction point was heavily guarded, with hunter teams positioned to intercept candidates during the final stage of their journey. Most candidates would arrive exhausted from 48 hours of evasion and movement, making them vulnerable to capture just short of their goal. But Emma had conserved her energy through efficient movement and superior route planning. More importantly, she had detailed intelligence about hunter team positions from her 40 hours of observation and radio monitoring. As Emma studied the extraction point through her binoculars, she realized that she could use her intelligence to help other candidates successfully complete the exercise. The question was whether she was willing to risk her own success to ensure that others could achieve theirs. The answer for Emma Chun was never in doubt. Over the next 4 hours, Emma orchestrated what would later be described as one of the most sophisticated tactical operations in the history of Special Forces selection. Using her detailed knowledge of hunter team positions and movement patterns, she guided candidate after candidate through safe approach routes to the extraction point. Thunder, a just bearing 15 degrees north. The Overwatch position is currently unoccupied. Phoenix, hold position for 120 seconds. Patrol rotation will clear your route. Eagle, underground approach is viable through a drainage system. Entry point at your 2 o'clock. Her guidance was so effective that the exercise's success rate reached unprecedented levels. Candidates who should have been captured in the final hours instead arrived at the extraction point safely, their missions completed successfully. When Emma finally made her own approach to the pickup zone, she moved with the confidence of someone who had already achieved her primary objective. Her mission hadn't been simply to reach the extraction point, it had been to demonstrate the leadership qualities that Special Forces required. As the extraction helicopter lifted off with the final group of successful candidates, Emma looked down at the terrain where she had spent 48 hours proving that strength came in many forms. She had been isolated, sabotaged, and targeted for elimination by her fellow candidates. Instead of being weakened by the opposition, she had become stronger. Instead of being focused solely on her own success, she had elevated the performance of everyone around her. The helicopter carried her back to the compound where new challenges were waiting. But Emma Chun was no longer the uncertain candidate who had arrived 3 weeks earlier. She was becoming the kind of leader that Special Forces needed, someone who could succeed under any conditions while ensuring that Others succeeded alongside her. The isolation had failed to break her. Instead, it revealed the depth of her character and the breadth of her capabilities. As the compound grew larger in the helicopter's windows, Emma prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead, confident that she had the skills and determination to overcome them. The real test, however, was still to come. 3 months into selection, only 12 candidates remained from the original 40. Emma had not only survived every challenge but had consistently ranked in the top 3 performers. Her reputation had evolved from skeptical curiosity to grudging respect to something approaching legend among the remaining candidates. The final exercise was unlike anything they had experienced. Instead of individual challenges or small team operations, all 12 candidates would participate in a joint mission that would determine who earned the Green Beret and who went home. The scenario was a simulated hostage rescue in a fortified compound deep in the California mountains. Intelligence indicated that 3 civilians were being held by a numerically superior force of instructors playing enemy combatants. The mission parameters were complex: neutralize the threat, extract the hostages, and ensure 0 civilian casualties. What the candidates didn't know was that this exercise was designed around a real-world scenario that had gone catastrophically wrong 6 months earlier. A special forces unit had attempted a similar rescue operation in Syria, resulting in the loss of 4 operators and the death of 2 hostages. The instructors were testing whether this group of candidates could succeed where experienced operators had failed. Emma was assigned as the operations intelligence coordinator, responsible for analyzing reconnaissance data and identifying weaknesses in the enemy's defensive structure. As she studied the compound through high-resolution drone footage, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The building's architecture was nearly identical to a structure she had encountered during her humanitarian work in Syria. More troubling, the defensive positions and patrol patterns were almost exactly the same as those used by militants she had observed firsthand. This wasn't just a training exercise. It was a recreation of a real mission that had ended in tragedy. Something's wrong, Emma told Rodriguez during their planning session. These defensive patterns aren't random. They're too sophisticated, too realistic. What are you thinking? Thompson asked, his earlier skepticism now replaced by complete trust in Emma's analytical abilities. Emma pointed to the compound's layout. On their tactical display, the enemy positions are designed to create what appears to be multiple entry points, but they're actually channeling attacking forces into predetermined kill zones. This isn't a test of our tactical skills. It's a test of whether we can identify and avoid a trap that has already killed real soldiers. The revelation changed everything. Instead of planning a conventional assault, Emma proposed a strategy that would neutralize the trap while accomplishing the mission objectives. Her plan was audacious and required perfect coordination between all 12 candidates. We don't attack the compound, Emma explained. We make them abandon it. Her strategy was based on a fundamental principle she had learned from studying asymmetric warfare. Sometimes the best way to defeat a superior force isn't to fight them directly, but to change the conditions of engagement entirely. Emma had identified a critical vulnerability in the compound's design. The facility's power supply came from a single generator located outside the main defensive perimeter. More importantly, the building's ventilation system was connected to a series of underground maintenance tunnels that could be accessed from outside the compound. Here's what we're going to do, Emma continued. Wilson and Stevens will disable the power generator, creating a blackout that forces the enemy to adjust their defensive positions. While they're dealing with the power loss, Parker and Crawford will introduce smoke into the ventilation system, making the building uninhabitable. Thompson studied the plan with growing admiration. You're forcing them to evacuate the hostages themselves. Exactly, Emma confirmed. When they bring the hostages outside, will be positioned to intercept during the confusion. No assault on fortified positions, no risk of civilian casualties in crossfire, and no walking into their prepared kill zones. The plan required split-second timing and flawless execution. Each team had to perform their assigned tasks simultaneously, creating multiple distractions that would overwhelm the enemy's ability to respond effectively. As the operation commenced, Emma coordinated communications from an overwatch position that allowed her to monitor all aspects of the mission. Her voice became the calm center around which the chaos of the operation revolved. Power team, you're green for approach. Smoke team, stand by for initiation. Intercept teams, prepare for target emergence at multiple exit points. The power loss occurred exactly as planned, plunging the compound into darkness that disrupted enemy communications and coordination. The smoke introduction was even more effective than Emma had anticipated. Within minutes, thick clouds began pouring from every opening in the building. But then something went wrong that Emma hadn't anticipated. The enemy didn't evacuate the hostages as expected. Instead, they began moving deeper into the compound, apparently willing to endure the smoke rather than expose themselves to what they assumed was a waiting ambush. Emma realized that her plan had been too successful. The enemy commander was sophisticated enough to recognize the tactical situation and was choosing to risk smoke inhalation rather than face what he perceived as certain capture outside. All teams hold position, Emma transmitted. Enemy is not responding as anticipated. Switching to a contingency plan. But there was no contingency plan. Emma was improvising in real time, trying to save a mission that was seconds away from catastrophic failure. If the hostages remained inside the smoke-filled building much longer, they would suffer serious injury or death from respiratory distress. Emma made a decision that would define her entire military career. All teams, this is Control. I'm going in. Negative, Rodriguez responded immediately. That's suicide, Chen. The building is full of smoke and armed hostiles. The hostages are going to die if someone doesn't get them out, Emma replied. I'm small enough to move through the ventilation system and reach them before the smoke causes permanent damage. What followed was the most dangerous 10 minutes of Emma's life. Using building schematics she had memorized and her knowledge of the ventilation system, she entered the compound through a maintenance shaft that was barely large enough for her petite frame. Moving through the smoke-filled building required navigation skills that bordered on supernatural. Emma crawled through ductwork, followed air currents to locate the hostages, and used her knowledge of the building's layout to avoid enemy positions that she couldn't see but could hear moving through the corridors. She found the 3 hostages in a basement room, semi-conscious from smoke inhalation and unable to help themselves. The enemy guards had abandoned their posts, retreating to areas with better air quality while maintaining their defensive positions. Emma's rescue of the hostages required multiple trips through the ventilation system, carrying each person individually to safety. Her small size, which had been seen as a disadvantage throughout selection, became the critical factor that made the rescue possible. By the time she emerged from the compound with the final hostage, Emma was barely conscious herself. Smoke inhalation had damaged her respiratory system, and the physical demands of carrying 3 people through confined spaces had pushed her body beyond its limits, but she had succeeded where the original mission had failed. All 3 hostages were alive. All 12 candidates had completed the exercise successfully, and 0 casualties had been sustained. As Emma collapsed at the extraction point, surrounded by medics and her fellow candidates, she heard Sergeant Major Harrison's voice over the radio. All teams, this is command. Mission accomplished. Outstanding work. But the real validation came from her fellow candidates. Thompson was the first to reach her, his eyes filled with something that looked like awe. Chun, he said, what you just did ... That was the most incredible thing I've ever seen. Rodriguez knelt beside her as the medics checked her vital signs. You saved them all, Emma. Not just the hostages, all of us. If this mission had failed, we all would have washed out. Emma looked around at the faces surrounding her, candidates who had started as skeptics, critics, and even enemies. Now they were looking at her with the kind of respect that could only be earned through actions that transcended normal expectations. We did it together, Emma managed to say through her damaged throat. This was always about the team. The graduation ceremony 3 days later was unlike any in the compound's history. Of the 12 candidates who had started the final exercise, all 12 earned their green berets. The success rate was unprecedented, and the instructors attributed it directly to Emma's leadership and tactical innovation. But for Emma, the real moment of validation came when Captain Morrison, the former Delta Force operator, approached her. After the ceremony, "Lieutenant Chun," he said, "I've been in Special Forces for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like what you did in that compound. You didn't just complete the mission, you revolutionized how we think about hostage rescue operations." Emma smiled, still feeling the effects of the smoke inhalation, but stronger than she had ever felt in her life. "Thank you, sir, but I just did what the situation required." "That," Morrison replied, "is exactly what makes you Special Forces material." 6 months later, Captain Emma Chun returned to the same compound where she had once been dismissed as too weak for Special Forces selection. This time, she wore the uniform of an instructor, assigned to develop new training protocols based on her innovative approaches to tactical operations. Among the new candidates was a familiar face, Derek Mason, the former ranger who had led the efforts to sabotage her equipment and eliminate her from selection. He had washed out during Week 8 and was attempting selection for the second time. When Mason saw Emma, his eyes widened with recognition and something that might have been shameful. "Ma'am," he said, snapping to attention. "Candidate Mason, reporting for training." Emma returned his salute with the same quiet confidence she had shown on her first day. "Welcome to selection, Candidate Mason. I hope you're ready to learn what it really means to be part of a team." As she looked out at the new group of candidates, Emma realized that her journey had come full circle. She was no longer the woman they had called too weak for Special Forces. She was the operator who had redefined what strength meant, who had proven that the greatest victories came not from individual prowess, but from the courage to sacrifice everything for others. The compound's motto, carved in stone above the main entrance, read, "De oppresso liber," to free the oppressed. Emma Chun had lived those words in the most literal way possible, and in doing so, had become exactly what Special Forces needed. A leader who understood that true strength comes from the willingness to risk everything to save everyone else. Impact of Emma's innovations extended far beyond that single graduation class. Her ventilation system rescue technique was incorporated into Special Forces training manuals worldwide. Military academies began studying her tactical approaches as examples of asymmetric problem solving. The hostage rescue scenario she had successfully navigated became a standard training exercise, with her solution serving as the benchmark for success. But perhaps more importantly, Emma's journey changed the culture of Special Forces selection itself. The systematic harassment and sabotage that had once been tolerated as part of the process was recognized as counterproductive to identifying the best candidates. New protocols were established to ensure that selection focused on capability, rather than conformity to traditional expectations. 3 years after her graduation, Emma was promoted to major and assigned to lead a Special Forces unit in a classified deployment. Her team, which included several of her former selection classmates, achieved a mission success rate that was unprecedented in Special Forces history. When asked about her leadership philosophy, Emma's response became legendary within the Special Operations community. "Strength isn't about how much weight you can carry," she said. "It's about how much weight you can help others carry." The moment you start thinking about what you can accomplish alone, you've forgotten what Special Forces is really about. Emma's influence extended beyond military operations into recruitment and training. Young women who had never considered military service began applying to Special Forces programs, inspired by proof that excellence could overcome prejudice. The demographic composition of Special Forces units began shifting, bringing new perspectives and capabilities that enhanced overall effectiveness. Today, Captain Chun continues to serve not just as a Special Forces officer, but as a reminder that the greatest barriers are often the ones we place on ourselves. Sometimes, the person everyone underestimates is exactly the person you need to count on when everything is on the line. Her legacy lives on in every mission completed, every life saved, and every barrier broken by those who followed in her footsteps. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.